This is episode number 9 of Dev Branch, How to Hire a WordPress Developer. Brought to you by ServerPress Maker's Desktop Server. They make local WordPress development easy. Check them out at serverpress.com. And the events calendar. The events calendar is the best calendar for events on your website and your clients' websites. Go check them out over at eventscalendar.com and use the promo code WPwatercooler for 20% off your purchase of this great product. I do want to tell you one thing. If you're going to be selling events and making, selling tickets to events, eventscalendar.com. Go take a look at it. Good stuff. And go to patreon.com/WPwater. Please help us out over there. We'd really appreciate that. Find folks that help us out as well. I'm Jason Tucker. I'm an IT director and WordPress web developer. You can find me at Jason Tucker on Twitter.
I'm Steve Zangin. I'm the founder of Zeek Interactive, and I run the OC WordPress meetup.
And you all know who it is. It's your boy, Jason Cosper, a.k.a. Fat Mullenweg.
We're a podcast as well if you're listening to us or watching us. You can go and subscribe to us as a podcast. Go to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. There's plenty of those places that you can listen to us at over there. How's it going, folks?
Good intro music.
Thanks, man. I didn't have enough time to fade it out, but hey, whatever. So today we're going to be talking about how to hire a WordPress developer. How to hire a WordPress developer. We're WordPress developers.
We are,
and most of us are hireable. And
we are,
yeah. And if you want to hire a WordPress developer, it'd probably be a good idea to know some stuff about WordPress developers, about how to approach them, how to be a good client, any of those sorts of things. So let's get started. Steve, this was your topic. How do you want to kind of start this off?
I think you touched on a good point here is how do you be a good client, right? Because that's often overlooked and is probably it is critical to the success of any project, right? Of any outsource resource that you're hiring, right? So that's true of any that's true of any business, but especially developers. And I'll give you kind of some of the context here, right? So if you're listening to this and you have worked with a developer before, we, and I include myself in this category, we are a unique breed. Developers are mostly kind of cut from the same cloth. There is a certain type of person that gets attracted to becoming a developer. Developers are notorious for being not great communicators, right? And so where I'd start with, how to be a good client is really there should be a focus on strong communication, right? And communication is going to be success. It's going to be critical to the success of any project, but especially when dealing with a developer. Take what I said, sort of for, at face value or for what it's worth, but it is kind of true that, if you're working with somebody that is not great at offering up communication or offering up transparency or any of those things that are sort of critical to the project, it's going to become up to you as the client to pull that information out of the out of the person on the other side of the table.
Makes sense. And
this happens more often than not, right? A lot of the projects that I inherited because the developer was, not a bad developer that I inherited the project from. They weren't doing anything necessarily wrong from a development standpoint. They just weren't communicating the status of the project, and that's important to my clients.
And
again, I know I just insulted pretty much everybody that's watching our show, but does that make sense?
I mean, Cosper's eyes got really big as you started going through a long list of things that you wanted to insult. Yes.
Honestly, if you want to find a developer in the time of WordCamps, I used to jokingly say, look for the white guy with a beard and about 30 extra pounds. And you're pretty sure to find at least 30 extra pounds, and you're sure to find a developer.
Sitting in the corner by himself. That you forgot that part.
Right.
Right. There are a handful of developers who are fortunately confident enough and it can be around people easily enough to go out and give talks at WordCamps and stuff like that. So it's not an exclusive thing. I'm painting with a pretty broad brush there, but it's not far off either.
And again, I realize that we're stereotyping here, right? But the really good developers that I've worked with over my 26-year career, right, have been quiet, right? Yeah. They keep themselves. They want to just kind of hang out in their cave and write code, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? But that's just the kind of person you're gonna. If you want a really strong developer, that's the sort of personality you're going to get. And I'm saying this stuff because you need to know that going into the relationship, right? Because if you're expecting a normal working relationship from a developer, 9 times out of 10, that's not what's going to happen, right? And so it's important to expect that as a client, that you're not going to get normal communication, right? A lot of people, when I hear their horror stories about past projects, they talk about the developer ghosting them, right? I gave the specs and the developer went away, and then they came back and nothing was what I expected it to be, right? So, and sometimes that span is months, right? Literally, there was just months of quiet, and all of a sudden, here's your project, and it's nothing what I had envisioned, right?
Yeah.
But that's actually very normal in our space. Again, I'm not saying there's anything, I'm not passing judgment. There's no good or bad here, but that's what most developers are expecting to happen, right? You gave me the tasks, right? I'm going to go off into my cave and I'll report back when I'm done, right? That's just the attitude, right? But that's not what most clients want. And so to be a good client, you need to set up milestones, set up communication, set up a path for communication, right? Set expectations around what you want to happen with the project, right? Because most developers on left to their own devices are not going to do that for you, in my experience, right? Now, it's different when you're working with an agency, right? An agency set up typically with a project manager or an account manager or somebody that is managing the project, who is that buffer between the client and the developer, right? That's really what that project manager's job is to deal with the quiet developer, right? To get the current status of the project so that they can communicate it to the client, right?
Right.
That's what that project manager's for.
And that makes it really difficult if you're a one-person shop.
And that's really
to be both.
And that's why I suggested the title of this episode specifically, how to hire a WordPress developer. This is not how to hire a WordPress agency, right? It's different. And it is specific for a reason, right? So really what I'm referring to is a one-to-one relationship between a client and a freelance developer. That's what I had in mind when I titled this this episode. So number one, communication. I had that on my list here. All right, that's key. And expect that communication isn't going to be typical. I was going to say normal. That's not the word. It's not going to be typical, right? And again, normal. The reason I didn't use the word normal is because that's passing judgment, right? It's not typical, right? It's just different. Expect communication to be different. And again, if you go into it with that expectation, then there are no surprises. But that's a good segue, right? In about surprises, right? I think you need to expect surprises, right? There are going to be surprises during your project, right? And so I think the reason I bring that up is because when a surprise happens, and we'll define surprises in a minute, but when a surprise happens, right, it's up to you as the client as to how you're going to react to that surprise, right? And so there's many ways to react to a surprise, right? One way is to get angry, right? I didn't expect this. This was wrong. This is different than what I explained, right? So surprise happens. You get angry. That's no good for the project. It's no good for the relationship between you and the developer. It is no good for the it's no good for the outcome of the project, right? Because things like that, getting angry about surprises, is going to affect motivation, right? And so I've found that it's best if you can control those reactions, expect surprises, and rather than reacting with anger, go into those situations with questions about why something is different than what you expected, and that's going to ultimately result in a better outcome, right?
Right. So how should the client set those expectations that they want from the developer? Because they're, not all clients are developer friendly.
Yeah,
So
and let me
approach it?
Let me define surprises first before I answer that, because I have that what you just asked really is my next point, right? So let's talk about what surprises are, right? To me, a surprise is something is different than what I expected it to be. The functionality is different. The look and feel is different. The something functions different than what I explained to the developer. That's a surprise. A surprise may be something's going to cost more. Right, it costs more than I expected, right? Because there was something that was, not expected at the start of the project, right? So that's a surprise. A surprise is something came in late. It came in longer than expected, right? All of those things I kind of lump under surprises, right? Surprise, right? this happened. Something's different than what I expected. That, to me, I categorize all that as a surprise, right? And again, as the client, you can control how you react to surprises. And I like to react to surprises with by taking a breath and simply asking questions, or just explaining, hey, this isn't what I expected, right? Explain to me why you did it this way, right? And a surprise actually might have resulted from good intentions, right? Surprises and everything I've expressed so far isn't necessarily done with malice. There doesn't necessarily have to be malicious intent behind a surprise. The developer may have done something in the client's best interest, but not communicated it, so it resulted in a surprise. Right. And
you have a good example of that? Like
most of the time, I find that that's the case, right? And so developer, sees, something that they need to develop. They see a problem, right? They decide to tackle the problem in a different way, maybe in a more time efficient way, maybe from a code efficiency way. Maybe there's just a whole different library that they include in the project to tackle this particular problem, right? And they do it in a way where they feel really good about it. They're proud of it, but they didn't communicate it, right? Because we got to go back to my first point, right? All that stuff happened in the cave, right? It happened in the background without any communication, and they did it with good intent, right? But when it's met with anger, then that all of that results in a bad outcome. Is that making sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
This all goes back to kind of what you were first talking about, which is having milestones and clear deadlines, and really from the outset making sure that they know what their milestones and their deadlines are, when deliverables are. And when you set a deadline, don't set it for the day you're going to launch something. Set it for like 2 weeks before you launch something, because I have seen people flipping out because their developer, we were set to launch on this day. And it's like, you're never going to hit that launch date. You always have to plan for Murphy and his damn law to rear its ugly head. Like, what can go wrong will. And you need to have a buffer for that. You need to be ready to say, hey, I need this project in 4 weeks, knowing that you actually need it in 6 weeks. And I'm not saying, you know what, that it could happen where the person you've hired to develop something comes in under time, under budget, it all goes wonderfully, but you need to have that buffer there. You can't put yourself on the hook for something. Like you can't depend on people. If you've ever, I know we talked about this on WP Water Cooler last week, the house analogy. If you hire somebody to do something on your house, and they go, oh, okay, like it never takes. Like, oh yeah, we'll be in and out and done with this in a week.
Every time I get an estimate for somebody to work on the house, I double it and then I triple it.
Right.
On both the money and the time.
Absolutely. Double it and triple it.
Right. So this isn't unique with just hiring developers. This is hiring plumbers, hiring house painters, hiring a mechanic to work on your car. It's everywhere, but you just have to know that you're in for this before you actually decide to take that plunge.
And so I 100% agree with everything you just said, and I'd lump that all under my third point, which is managing expectations. Right. So, Jason, you to answer your question earlier, right? The key is manage expectations and continue to manage expectations throughout the project, right? And expectations are on both sides, right? So as the client, you're not just managing expectations isn't just saying, this is what I expect to happen, right? It's also saying, hey, this is what I expect to happen, right? How do you achieve that on your side? And what are your expectations of me to make this happen, right? Expectations are a two-way street. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's another key here is managing those expectations. I think Cosper gave a great takeaway there, right? Always pad your schedule and don't tell your developer that the schedule is padded, because as soon as they know it's padded, that becomes the new schedule. Right. And you'll find, right, if you haven't done the first two things that I talked about, whatever date you quote is the date you can expect to see like the first version at the end of business on that day, right? So if my deadline is February 5th, right, I'm gonna see the first version of the project at the end of the day today. That's what's gonna happen. So it's a great nugget is pad your schedule, right? Expect it to take longer than what you said. But you said something else there, Cosper, and I want to kind of pull this out is you said, hey, the developer may come in ahead of schedule and under budget, right? And I'm going to encourage you as a client, and our listeners are going to hate this. If a developer comes in under budget, right, and you had budgeted for something originally, pay them what you originally budgeted, right? Because that's of value to you. Because they came in under schedule or under budget doesn't mean the project should be cheaper. Right. As a matter of fact, at that point, you should give them a bonus, right? So I'm just going to use some loose numbers here. Let's say your budget was $10,000, right? And it was 4 weeks, and they came in 3. That doesn't mean your budget is now $7,500 because they spent 3/4 of the time, right? You pay them the $10,000. And as a matter of fact, they got you in a week early, so give them another $2,000 bonus. And you know what that does? That motivates them to come in again under budget the next time around. If you cut their budget because they came in early, right, you've shown them that they actually provided no value whatsoever.
Right. I think if you've been burned in the past by a developer, and this developer in particular,
what do you mean if?
Well, I know, but I think you should approach this. You should approach this in a way that you feel that the developer is going to. This is going to be a longer relationship than this one project. Because you don't want to just go and be like, if you got screwed over on the previous person, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be screwed over on this with this person as well.
God, there's so many good takeaways there, right? So the first thing is, you're working with a developer. Once you hire a developer, it is much like a marriage. You've just entered into a long-term relationship. Whether you think it's one project or not, this is a long-term relationship, so you should expect that. Right.
You have maintenance, huge changes. You have, we want to do a full redesign. We just changed the name of our company. We're now pivoting. It could be all the things. And you want to have a good relationship with that developer.
Once the developers touch the code, they put their signature on it, right? And they've put their style on it, right? And so if you like, well, assuming you like working with that developer, right? There are going to be changes down the road. There's going to be maintenance. You've entered into a long-term relationship. But the other thing I want to say, and I think this is critical, Jason, and I encounter this all the time, right? Your past relationships with other developers have no bearing on the current relationship with the current developer, right? And it's tough. It's tough to separate because, if you think about that in our love life, right? Everybody does this, right? They bring the skeletons from the past relationships into the current relationship. That's how relationships work. So it's natural to bring those skeletons into your working relationship with a developer. But you have to find a way to separate that, right? Because this new developer isn't the old developer, right? There may be some similar patterns, right? But it's not the same.
Yeah.
And it's a tough thing to do, but I find myself dealing with that all the time, right? Being I'm going to use air quotes, but being quote unquote punished, right, for something a developer did that predated me on the project. Happens all the time.
Yeah.
Despite the generalizations that we were making earlier, developers aren't a monolith. And to reiterate what Steve said, one developer isn't going to be exactly like another one. When I mentioned, they might come in under budget or, ahead of time, that happens almost as much as the delays or, these weird twist surprises, these M. Night Shyamalan-esque surprises.
He was there
happens
the whole time. He was there.
I know. Yeah. It's the trees. The trees are trying to kill people.
Well, and like M. Night Shyamalan, not all of his his creations are created equal.
But right. Here's the thing to know, right? I know we've overgeneralized and stereotyped, but the truth of the matter is developers have different skill sets, right? Not all languages are the same. Not all frameworks are the same. Not all servers are the same, right? Not all software is the same. And so developers have different histories, different things they've learned, and they bring different skill sets into the project, right? So even the best developers are not going to approach every project the exact same way. And that's okay. Right. So it's not, none of this is done maliciously. It just is what it is. Right. And so, even though they may be kind of cut from the same cloth from a personality standpoint, they bring different skill sets to the project.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you as the client come with your own set of baggage and your own set of issues, but you also come with an understanding of the company that you run, the website that you want to have built. If you've done this before, at least you have some of that experience as well. And don't assume that it's just going to go exactly the same way this time.
And here's what's important about that. This was my last point. So what's important is to articulate your business goals as best as possible to the developer, right? Because they need to understand the benefits of what they're building as well, right? There's a value to what they're building, and if you can articulate that this is the result that will end up from this, that's actually motivating for the developer, right? We need this much traffic, or we need to scale this big, or we need this many sales, or whatever your business goals are. Articulate those, make them part of your scope, right? Articulate them in the scope, put them on paper, bring the developer into the business conversation, because I guarantee you that will motivate them. That by itself will motivate them to get the results that you're looking for. We've talked about scope quite a bit during this call, right? I've been doing this for a long, long time, right? And what I've discovered is there is no perfect scope, right? At the beginning of the project, you can get as detailed as you want, right? But the scope is going to change. And you need to be okay with that, right? And so one thing I'd advise both sides of the table and I've talked about this, in the past at WordCamp talks, is treat the scope as a living, breathing document, right? The scope, you don't write the scope at the beginning and then put it on the shelf, right? The scope should be always ever changing and should reflect the current state of the project, right? And all of the questions that you encounter along the way should be addressed in the scope.
Yeah. I don't want to throw this in 5 minutes left into the show, but there's going to be change orders.
Yes.
There are going to be change orders.
Just like if you were doing a project on the house and you hired a contractor, there are always going to be change orders.
Absolutely.
And you got to know how to navigate them.
And change orders are not a bad thing. They're a good thing, right? It's a way to document the understanding of what's changing, why it's changing, right? And a change order may not necessarily result in an impact to the timeline and the budget, right? A change order can be, hey, this is a change to the scope. We're pulling this thing out of the scope because this change became a higher priority. So I'm simply swapping things out, but it is still important to document it as a change order so that everybody understands what changed.
Yeah, that's that living, breathing document piece to it. Yeah, because down the road you can find out that developer is capable of doing these things that you weren't necessarily aware of, or the client themselves says, we'd really love to be able to do this thing, and now you can go through and either set up that change order or what have you.
And frankly, that's where the change orders come into play when I do a project in the house. Because I watch the contractor and I go, you know what? It'd be cool if we put that thing over there. Right? And you go, I can absolutely do that for you. Let me get you.
Yep.
Right?
I had many $800 change orders during my process of getting some electricity put into my house.
I bought a $7,500 beam in a house when I did a small add-on because I wanted something to just move slightly, and he said, okay, well, that's a structural change, right? So that just became a $7,500 change order because we got to put a piece of wood in the ceiling. Okay.
And if you aren't to the point where you own a home and don't have any idea about this, Sarah, my wife, and I watch a lot of AMC or TCM rather. TCM.
Yes.
And there is a movie that constantly makes the rounds over there. It might still be in the TCM app. It is a Cary Grant movie. Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House. Are you familiar with the movie, Steve? It looks like you're nodding. And
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
Cary Grant, his wife convinces him, like, we need to quit living in an apartment in the city. Let's go get a house in the country. And they find a house. It's falling apart. They end up having to tear it down, and it's all the costs involved with doing this, all of the little surprises, all of the things like that. It's like an hour and a half long. It's very funny, despite the fact that it's an older movie that you might not want to give a chance. But it is fantastic and really goes into why, or how things can go wrong.
They remade it years later with Tom Hanks called The Money Pit. It's basically the same movie.
Yeah, it's the same movie. Yep.
Same movie. Yeah. Anyway.
Oh my gosh. Well, hey, that's about wraps it up. I have no intro or no outro for today, so I want to say thank you very much for hanging out with us. Really appreciate it. Talk to y'all later. You have a good one. See ya.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.